Alright, hello, welcome back to another Magicka Nightblade video, build video for the Dragonhold patch. This one is a PvE build. It will be on Dots' website. It is called the Architect of Demise. So I am using the slightly more utilitarian version of this build. The mega DPS setup will be Zans with Spell Strategist and then Master Architect, but because I don't just want to be a target dummy hero, and also I appreciate the max health that comes from Valken, I use Valken and Mother Sorrow. So onward with the build. You can kind of see what we have here. I'll leave it on the screen just for another second. Take a screenshot if you have to. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now that you've had a look at that, let's go look at what we're wearing more in depth. So we got infused front bar, back bar. On the back board you need the Maelstrom Inferno Staff. If you do not have the Maelstrom Inferno Staff, take Blockade of Fire or whatever morph you have, take that off your bar, and replace it with good old Soul Trap over here. Soul Trap still does a fair amount of damage. Yeah, right, this will completely hamper your ability to do fair AoE damage, but that's just a way to get around it. But we're hoping you have a VMA Destro Staff, and if you do, then you definitely want to use that. It's still a good option. It still works. Most of what you use it for is the buff it gives our light attacks, and our light attacks do a lot of damage, so it's still a good thing to use. Also, who doesn't like a little bit of AoE damage? I will also say that Grofdar synergizes really nicely with Blockade of Fire, because Grofdar for some reason has a really high chance to proc the burning status effect. And if a target is burning, then Blockade of Fire does extra damage to them, which is partially why we have this as a fire enchantment. Back bar, the VMA Maelstrom also infused, and we want it to be a weapon damage enchantment. Jewelry, all arcane, all spell damage, and then up here you can go all max Magicka, all divines. You can have, like, if you have your chest, your pants, or your helmet be infused, for whatever reason, you might as well go divines. But if it comes out as infused and that's what you got, then don't worry about changing it, because that's still a good option. But if you can change it, then definitely change it eventually. Yeah, that's kind of it for the gear. We've got some Mother Sorrow just kind of tacked on, and I used a Mother Sorrow staff, and then the Master Architect is on the jewelry, and then 2 body pieces. So yeah, there's that. This is what my stats look like. I seem to remember having a little bit more max Magicka, so that's a little weird. But, we got Inner Light on our front bar. When I'm doing raids and stuff, I put Inner Light on my back bar, but when I'm just going around doing dungeons, I like to actually put Sap Essence here. Because 1, Sap Essence keeps me alive. 2, it's an AoE ability that is somewhat spammable. So I can hit Strife, Structured Entropy, which is also a heal over time, and just walk into a crowd of people and spam sap, and I'm doing a fair amount of damage whilst keeping myself and others alive. It's great for carrying people. It's great for just trash mobs and vet dungeons. So that's why I have that on my bar. Otherwise, take this off and put Inner Light there, because Inner Light will give you that juicy DPS boost. Typically you'd start off with Fiery Rage, like if you have one. You don't have to. So you hit Fiery Rage, kind of make sure you have your buffs up, and then throw stuff down and go ham on your target. Pretty standard. The play style hasn't really changed much. I'm just kind of changing the sets around, and like the quote-unquote rotation, if we can say there's a rotation. I often say that there isn't really a rotation. It's more just there's a couple of combos that you follow that can make up a rotation, but because of how this game is, there is no strict rotation, especially for a Magicka Nightblade. If you're a Dragonite, then there's kind of a rotation, but not for Magicka Nightblade. Now that Merciless is 40 seconds, that's going to increase our DPS by a little, because we don't have to recast it all the fucking time. It's not going to make too much of a difference on our sustain though, so don't get your hopes up. Yeah, keep siphoning attacks up at all times. Make sure you have the ward on your bar. You probably need a ward to survive. You can do harness or dampen. I find harness is nice just because the ward is almost the most expensive skill you have. Before they increased the cost of Blockade of Fire, it was the most expensive skill on your bar. It's even more expensive than Inner Light. That's how expensive it is. And in PvP is definitely the most expensive skill. So I find Harness Magicka is a better option than Dampen. Though if I'm doing VMA, I actually kind of like having Dampen. So I'll put that out there for you if you guys are doing VMA. If you're doing a self-parse, what I typically do is I take this off and take this off. Now, a lot of people do like parsing by themselves the wrong way. First off, they don't always use potions, which is going to be a problem. Secondly, they don't Ellie drain themselves, so they run out of magic, and they don't have the penetration on the target that they normally would. So this is what my bar looks like when I'm doing a dummy parse, because this right here would just be replaced with a ward. So I'm honestly not cheesing it that much. Overall, it's more or less what I would use. So I don't feel cheap at all. On our front bar, we've got our Merciless, Swallow Soul, Execute, and Debilitate. So I'm using Debilitate because I do PvP. You will get more DPS if you use Cripple. Also, if you're playing like without a healer and no one's using Ellie Drain, and honestly that happens more often than you'd think, especially if you're like just helping low levels out, Debilitate's kind of nice because it helps keep your Magicka up. So Debilitate isn't a huge difference in DPS, but you also have to remember that when we're doing a shit ton of DPS in higher game modes, like if we're doing Vet Mob Lorcage hard mode and we're having a bunch of raid buffs, then everything multiplies, so it'll be a lot more noticeable there than it will everywhere else. So if you want to do max DPS, get Cripple, but because I do PvP as well, I have Debilitate here. Soul Harvest on our front bar. You know, this helps us get a lot of ultimate so that we can go on our back bar, hit Fiery Rage. Then after that goes, we go back to our front bar, wait for everything to die, and then hopefully Soul Harvest collects it all and we can just do it all over again. Because Nightblade's a fucking ult spammer. It's kind of nice like that. Other than that, you don't really have any other Destro abilities that you're using on your front bar. It's just those two on the back bar. You can try and swap things around a little if you really want to, but this front bar, like this stuff right here, should not really be moved around much. You could try and put like Entropy there. If you want, you might get more damage out of that. You could try and put Soul Harvest on the back bar because, you know, this is where your AoE spammable is. So you could just sit back here and then do it. But honestly, I have no real love for that. So it's kind of whatever. Also, because we have Mother's Sorrow active on our front bar, I like to be on my front bar as much as possible. And that is something that you're going to want to try and do, because if you're on your back bar, you're not getting the stats from the full stats from Mother's Sorrow. So if you're on your back bar, you want to be switching to your front bar as soon as you possibly can. Also, for food and potions, you should always go over that. I use Apprentice mostly because I do PvP and it's a good solid option. You can also use... There's a cat climbing into my lap right now. Come on, Gina. Oh my god, you're gonna fall. You can also use the Thief if you want to. I actually did some testing around with that, and it's not bad. It actually came out almost the same as Apprentice. I had some come up a little less. It was almost equal. So if you want to use the Thief, you can, but I'm just gonna go with the Apprentice because it's a good option. You want not Major Prophecy. You want Witch Mother's Potent Brew if you're on like a Dunmer or a High Elf. If you're in a raid group, you can do blue food most of the time and you'll be able to sustain relatively all right. As a Breton, always use blue food. As a Breton, you have so much sustain, so just use blue food. No question about that whatsoever. As a Khajiit, I know there are some people who have been using Khajiit. Just use Witch Mothers, I'd say. Just use Witch Mothers, and basically everything. If you're not a Breton, just use Witch Mothers. It's just a good food objectively, even though they nerfed it. It still does the job. You know, I'm still hitting 40k DPS, so I don't care. Otherwise, I believe that is more or less it. We'll have a look at our CP really quickly. So I have 19 into Blessed here, so you don't need to do this because this is a PvP thing. I have 66 into Elfborn, 66 into Elemental Expert, 10 into Spell Erosion. Going over here, we have 66 into Master at Arms, 9 into Staff Expert. This is a pretty important one. You always want to have like a little here because light attacks do a fuck ton of damage, and also this right here will also help with your DPS. And then I have 34 to Thaumaturge. because I use damage over time effects. So with this 19 into Blessed, you could, put it over here. You can find the jump points on Allcast or Dots Gaming's website. There is a little graph there that'll tell you the jump points, and you can increase. I would do Elfborn rather than Elemental Expert. I would probably do Elfborn and maybe Spell Erosion. I'd just maybe split it between those two. If you're doing a trial, you might want to consult your trial group, because a lot of trial groups have different setups. Like, some people don't have as much penetration. So if you're doing trial groups, consult them when it comes to this. Otherwise, if you're not, I'd just take that 19 from Blessed and put it right into Spell Erosion, because you're probably not going to be at max pen all the time, so Spell Erosion's fine. As for defensive CP, forget this Resistant. You actually want to be taking all these points from Resistant and you want to put them into Elemental Defender and Hardy. Thick-Skinned, I have 52 into here just because, and then I have 61 in here because most things that do damage to us in PvE are direct attacks or direct damage attacks. So honestly, only really need Ironclad. You can put this at like 75 or 66 if you want to. Going over here, I have 31 into Bastion because this field position thing right here is really helpful. If someone dies, I can go over and try to res them because of this, and I'm hopefully not going to get killed in the process because I have 15% damage mitigation. Also, this is helpful because when someone gets rezzed in battle, they don't have a shit ton of resources. So having a bunch of Magicka, even as a stam build, could be nice. But this definitely mostly benefits tanks, healers, and Magicka DPS. Otherwise, you could kind of split things around in here as you like, but you want to make sure that Arcanist is 100 or at least 75. So if you're a lower CP, 75 is what you want it. And then definitely put some into Warlord and Sprinter. Otherwise, the rest is kind of up to you. I just do Sprinter for convenience, but Warlord, you do get CC'd in some dungeons and trials, so being able to reliably CC break is kind of important. And then I just have some stuff here because, mitigation. I find blocking in trials to be more important than dodge rolling, so maybe shift some of those points into blocking, but I'm stupid and I dodge roll a lot. So yeah, all those things are stuff that you're going to have to be mindful of. Now, I know my CP is geared more towards a PvPer, but honestly, I take this into PvE and I do just fine. I have completed pretty high score runs with this CP setup. So yeah. I am pulling my weight, so it's totally possible. It's possible. You just gotta practice and you gotta know what you're doing. Magicka Nightblade overall is actually pretty durable. So if my healer goes down in a dungeon, Magicka Nightblade is going to be able to stay alive longer because they have so many self-healing abilities that work well in PvE. Not so much in PvP, but that's going to keep you alive. And honestly, I feel like as a Magicka Nightblade, I should be the one to go get the downed person half the time because I can keep myself alive. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, that's the build. That's the character. This is just so I don't get one shot. Most people say put all into magic, and that's totally acceptable. I just took 4 out because I don't like being underneath 17k health when I do PvE. So yeah, that's the build. Thank you guys for watching, and the written version will be on Dots' website. Catch you all later.